Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Elsa Brenner, and I am soon to be graduating with a degree in marine science and earth and environmental sciences. My project was done, it explores the adaptive capacity of the Turneffe Atoll Belize Queen Conch fishery and was done under the direction of Dr. Paul Simonon and Rebecca Branconi. So I'd like to start by thanking the two of them, in addition to Dr. Peter Buston, who acted as my advisor on record, which allowed me to pursue this project. Thank you all, and let's get started. So the queen conch is a culturally and commercially important species throughout the Caribbean. However, over the past few decades, conch fisheries across the region have been in decline, predominantly due to overfishing, which is removing more conch from the environment than the population can sustain over time. To fish for conch, you free dive in shallow water to retrieve the animal off the sea floor and bring it back up to the surface. At the surface, you knock the shell, creating a hole in the spiral with a hammer to push the meat out. Shells are then discarded, and unprocessed meat is sold to co-ops for a set price before being processed and marked for sale. In Belize, the conch fishing season is closed during the breeding season between July 1st to September 30th each year. But in both 2019 and 2020, the fishery was closed early in the late spring because the national export quota for conch was reached before the end of the season. Current regulations also stipulate that conchs must have shells that have a length of 7 inches or larger, and that the meat must weigh 2 3/4 ounces when processed. Now, right off the bat, there are a few things that should stand out to you about those regulations. First, remember that the knocked shells are discarded after capture, so regulating adherence to the length requirement is rather difficult. Similarly, you can't weigh the meat until the conch has already been knocked, so fisherfolk have no way of knowing if their catch is legal until the animal has already been killed. What's even more interesting is that shell length has repeatedly been shown to be an insufficient metric for judging the animal's maturity. This presents a major problem. In order to maintain a stable fishery and a stable population, individuals need to be protected from harvest until they're old enough to reproduce. Shell lip thickness, which is this little bit here, or the measurement of the width of the bit of the shell that flares out so they can stick their eyes and foot out, has been shown to be a much more reliable indicator of conch maturity. Shells with a lip thickness of 10 millimeters or greater are considered to be mature, but there are no fishing regulations in Belize regarding lip thickness. So in the face of these early closures and a history of exploitation, our study addresses two things. First, we investigate whether the current regulations are sufficient to protect the juvenile conch population. And second, we identify threats to the Belizean queen conch fishery as perceived by members of the fishing community itself. We then assess the ability of that community to respond to external stressors to the system. And those stress events would be things like hurricanes, changing government regulations, fisheries closures, or even major trade disturbances like the ones caused recently by COVID-19. In November 2019, our team traveled to Belize, and over the course of just under 2 weeks, we analyzed 143 knocked shells from around the atoll and conducted 17 semi-structured interviews with local fishers and key informants in the region. From our shell analysis, we found that 86% of knocked shells met the minimum legal length requirement of 7 inches, and around 14% were undersized. These numbers show rather high adherence to the existing regulations. However, 79% of those knocked shells were below that 10 millimeter lip thickness threshold for maturity, which indicates that these length regulations are insufficient to protect the juvenile conch. From our interviews, we were able to determine that all fishing units believed that the conch fishery was in decline, and most directly identified overfishing as the primary cause. 5 of the fishing units we spoke to and all of our key informants, notably including those in law enforcement, stated that current enforcement practices were not effective or were failing. One fisher that we spoke to said it best, quote, "We are overpopulating the sea with fishers, and TASA is always out of gas." So TASA here is the Turneffe Atoll Sustainability Association, and they're the group tasked with enforcing fishing regulations on the atoll. From this quote, we can see a clear assessment of the state of the fishery and an identification of overfishing and ineffective enforcement as 2 of the factors contributing to decline. This individual then went on to say, People need to be smart about fishing. This is our home. We need to sustain it. Our shell findings are consistent with our conversations with fisherfolk, many of whom asserted that over the course of their career, they'd witnessed a decline in the conch fishery as well as a decrease in the individual sizes of each conch. These data all support the claim that current shell length guidelines are ineffective at protecting the juvenile conch. So shifting gears now, adaptive capacity is a measurement of a community's ability to anticipate, respond to, and recover from change. It's a component of both community resilience and community vulnerability, and is influenced by a unique set of factors that stem from an individual community's distinct needs. Assessments of adaptive capacity are designed to help identify areas of strength and those in need of improvement within a community. In our assessment, we identified 7 key components of adaptive capacity for the Turneffe Atoll fishing community. First, range, the distance that a fishing unit can travel based on the type of vessel that they're using. Catch diversity, which is the number of distinct fisheries that a unit relies on for their livelihood. Equipment, or the complexity of tools used to fish. Seasonality, the amount of time per year spent fishing. Generations, the total number of generations active within a fishing unit. Years of experience, or the number of years that one single individual within a unit has been fishing. And ecological, hold up. There we go. And ecological knowledge, which represents the amount of information about ecology and population dynamics that fishers exhibited during their interviews. For each of these 7 categories, grades of 1 to 3, with 1 being the least adaptable and 3 being the most adaptable, were assigned. And when added together, these scores cumulatively function as one unit's overall adaptive capacity. What you can see here is a sample of 3 units score distributions on the left and then the community average score on the right. What the graph is showing us is the 7 components of adaptive capacity from the last slide around the circumference of the circle, and then the concentric circles within the graph show the different scores, with 1 or the least adaptable being the smallest circle and 3 or the most adaptable being the largest circle. Each category score is mapped onto the radar so that you can see the diversity of responses and identify patterns from respondents to different categories. In the radar graph on the left, you can see that variation in responses, and on the right, you can see how the distribution fell across all respondents. We found that the inability to contribute additional time to fishing, that's the seasonality category, and the distance that the fishers were able to travel, or their range, were the 2 largest factors limiting adaptability. Fisherfolk working year-round are at an increased risk of economic strain if they were to require additional time fishing caused by decreasing catch per unit effort. And similarly, many fisherfolk are already approaching their range limits. So if scarcity were to necessitate fishing a larger area, they may be unsuited to adapt. Mobility and flexibility are 2 proven strategies for increasing your adaptive capacity. So these inabilities to expand their range or commit more time to fishing present direct conflicts to adapting. On the other hand, catch diversity is the area that the fisherfolk proved to be the most adaptable. So most fishers rely on 3 or more fisheries for their livelihood, and this diverse catch acts as an insurance to the fisherfolk by expanding their harvest and decreasing the likelihood of one singular halt on their income in the event of a fishery's decline or closure. So in conclusion, our research validates the consensus of the fisherfolk. The Turneffe Atoll conch fishery is in decline, and current regulations are insufficient to combat overfishing and protect the juvenile conch. Our assessments of adaptive capacity indicate that the fishery, though fairly stable right now, is at significant future risk of economic and ecological strain. Investment in the well-being of the fishing community is necessary to sustain or improve the adaptive capacity of fishing communities, both in Turneffe Atoll as well as around the globe. If you want to learn more, you can go ahead and scan this QR code to read the most recent draft of our unpublished manuscript and see the larger report that was submitted to the Belize Fisheries Department. Thank you so much to the BU Marine Program, the University of Belize Calabash Key Field Station, the Turneffe Atoll Sustainability Association, the Belize Fisheries Department, as well as the other members of my research team, Paul and Rebecca, who were my advisors, and then Vinny Salido and Vincent Baribeau. It's been incredible working with you all, and thanks for making this great. I will take any questions at this time.